Hello, 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 beautiful people. Welcome to Season 3, Episode 0, where we reintroduce ourselves, we being the hosts of Corrupting the Youth. First things first, who are we? My name is Jacob. I recently got my PhD from the University of Alabama, and I'm now an assistant professor, a social psychology assistant professor at California State University, East Bay. And here with me is my lovely, lovely co-host.
Hey, Jacob. So for
Oh.
those of you who don't know, I am Cassie Witt. Jacob and I went to graduate school together. We're lab mates. I also recently then graduated from the University of Alabama with my PhD in social psychology, and I am now an assistant professor of psychology at Eastern Kentucky University.
Yep. A little bit more about ourselves is that we have very common research interests as well as very unique ones, but a shared interest of ours is pedagogy, hence the kind of creation of this project or, this podcast. I care about things such as politics, intellectual humility, and such things. And Cassie, you have a lot of philosophy behind your back, hence even the title is a philosophy reference.
Right. Yeah. So a lot of my research, like Jacob's, crosses into like meta science territory. So we're both really interested in how psychologists do psychology research. Mine tends to be, a little bit more oriented towards the sort of epistemology of science. So those sorts of things definitely align with my research interests. But in thinking about this podcast and sort of our goals for this podcast, like we share, as Jacob said, a lot of research interests, but we are both really into pedagogy. And being a teacher is something that I think is important for both of our identities. I think I'm right in saying that. Yeah, Jacob.
Yeah, of course.
And so thinking about our goals for this podcast, really, we are hoping to try and establish a community of like-minded teachers and researchers. So if like being a good teacher is something that you are really interested in, we hope that this podcast will be a source of information, of inspiration, but also hopefully provide you with opportunities to connect with us and other psychology teachers out there, or even other teachers in higher education, or really even high school. We also are really hoping that this podcast is a place that promotes both a love of and increased value in pedagogy. So being two people who have now been in academia, who have been in higher education for a while, I think we have both kind of experienced environments where teaching maybe isn't the focus. And even if you are at an institution that is like primarily teaching focused, I think you can still sort of like run into different opinions or mindsets where like, maybe people wouldn't place that at the highest spot on the pedestal. But then of course, like we also hope that this podcast is just like a space for fun. Jacob and I are both really big fans of the late Bell Hooks. And in one of Bell Hooks's collections of essays, Teaching to Transgress, she says something along the lines of the classroom should be exciting, never boring. And it's kind of the same way at Corrupting the Youth, right? This is a place where we're excited and hopefully don't bore you.
Definitely. The idea of building community, promoting like a love and value of pedagogy and just having fun, I think Cassie did that very nicely. Because like if she and I are not having fun, then like what's the point of us doing this, right?
Exactly.
Ultimately, like it should not be an obligation. It should be cool. The next question would then be, cool, those are our goals. Who are we trying to talk to? And Cassie, you hinted this a little bit, especially with I think the reference to like maybe even high school teachers, but you could think of instructors across the board, right? So you can think about in high school, there's your college prep or CP courses of like psychology, honor psych, AP psych. If there are instructors or even students of those classes who are like want to know like the behind the scenes look of like what goes into teaching, please feel free to listen. But you can also imagine that because we're both academics, our main setting is academia. So you can think of graduate students, early career researchers, or really anyone along the career spectrum, right? Their timeline, where they're just like, you know what? Teaching, because like you never really master teaching, right? It's always like an ongoing process. And if listening to two like, weirdos just ramble on and on and on about anything really gives you a time and point to like pause and reflect, then that's like a little success, maybe. It's like, yes, we did our job. Because that's also just part of what we want to do. We want people to like start reflecting and think about how can we make teaching better, right? Cassie, I think I could speak for you a little bit as well, but like you and I are always talking about like, we just made the dumbest mistake, or like next time we're gonna do, like, it's just ongoing. But it's also fun, right? Because you can either be like paralyzed by it, or you can be like, here's an opportunity. And let's share this opportunity, and maybe like someone else can learn from our mistakes. And not, maybe if they can learn from it, vicarious learning, all the more power to them. So I would say that's a little bit about who we're trying to talk to anyone who's interested in teaching, anyone who does teach, and the students themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Our episodes tend to take all sorts of different formats, like some are more conversational. Sometimes we have interviews where we like bring in people who we really look up to as both teachers and researchers. So we, I think, have a really good track record of like bringing on some good guests who are, really outstanding instructors.
I think that some of our episode content really goes down to basics, right? Things that we were especially planning for the future. It's like, how do we break down our syllabi? There's lots of talks about or like basic colonialism in academia, and how do we decolonize syllabus or course design? Like, what does that even mean? So like breaking that down. We have like on trends of backwards assigned we've covered in the past, but also future trends as well that we'll get into.
Yeah, and something that we talk about, I feel like in most of our episodes, we talk about a lot of issues related to the incentive structure in academia. As science researchers, we both really care about incentive systems in doing science, but as teachers, like we absolutely have to talk about those sorts of things as well.
And even though we're breaking down the basics, we're going to be building them up as well with like flourishes, right? Like it's good that you have mastery of the basics, but there's also so many cool new trends going on. Things such as flipped classrooms, ungrading, we've talked a lot about, but there's also activities that we read about, that we do ourselves, that we're just learning more about, that leads to more effective student learning outcomes, that just increases both enjoyment for yourself, but also for your students. Something that they're like, oh, psychology is so cool, and I can directly see how this applies to my life. So kind of discussing about those ways of like expanding upon the basics with those flourishes.
Yeah, absolutely. We also spend a good amount of time on this podcast talking about things related to open science and transparency in science and how those connect to teaching as well. We'll talk about what does it mean to talk about, open science in the classroom? What does it mean to or how can you effectively teach about non-replicable classic studies and psychology with your students? And so we are so glad that you spent the time to listen to this episode, kind of orienting yourself to who we are, meeting us in a way. Welcome to your new parasocial relationship. But it doesn't have to be a parasocial relationship, because if you want to get in touch with us, you can find us on the web. We can be found on Facebook, Twitter, or X, and Instagram, all with the handle @CorruptYouthPod. And our email is also open all the time. Please email us. That would actually probably make my day. But if you want to email us, you can do so at corruptingtheyouthpod@gmail.com. So thank you all for being here. Jacob, you want to say goodbye?
Goodbye, goodbye, goodbye.